She was the sister nobody noticed. While Mary got the attention and Sybil got the admiration, Edith got the leftovers. She sat through family dinners where her opinions were brushed aside. She watched her sisters fall in love while she sat alone, quietly hoping that one day someone would look at her, really look at her, and choose her, not out of pity, not out of obligation, but because she was worth choosing, and for a long time. That day never came. She was left at the altar in front of everyone she knew. She loved a man who was already married and could never fully be hers. She carried a secret about her own daughter for years because the world she lived in would not accept the truth. Every time Edith reached for happiness, it slipped right through her fingers like sand, and yet she kept going. She kept getting up. She kept showing up to breakfast with the family, kept running her magazine, kept moving forward even when it felt completely pointless. That is the woman Bertie Pelham fell in love with. Not a perfect woman, not a polished, composed, and touchable woman like her sister Mary, but a real woman, a woman who had been knocked down so many times that her ability to still stand was nothing short of remarkable. And when Bertie leaned in and kissed her, it was not just a romantic moment between two people in a beautiful English house. It was the moment Edith Crawley finally got what she had always deserved. Asterisk to truly understand why the moment between Edith and Bertie felt so powerful. You have to understand what Edith went through before he ever walked into her life. Because Edith did not arrive at that kiss as a carefree young woman with nothing to lose. She arrived there as someone who had already lost more than most people could handle, and who had somehow, against all reasonable expectation, kept her heart open. Anyway, from the very beginning of Downton Abbey, Edith existed in the shadow of her sisters. The show made this clear almost immediately. Mary was the eldest, the one everyone fussed over, the one whose future mattered most to the family because of how inheritance and title work in that world. Sybil was the youngest and the most loved for her warmth and her spirit, and Edith was simply there, in the middle, trying to find her place in a family that never quite knew what to do with her. She was not cruel like Mary could sometimes be. She was not rebellious like Sybil. She was just Edith, trying, hoping, wanting to matter. And that quiet desperation made her one of the most human characters in the entire show, even if the people around her did not always see it that way. Her first real heartbreak came in a way that was almost painful to watch. She was set to marry Sir Anthony Strallan, an older man who genuinely cared for her. The wedding was planned, the dress was ready, the guests were seated in the church, and then, at the last possible moment, standing right there at the altar, Sir Anthony changed his mind. He told her he could not go through with it. He walked away, right there in front of her entire family and community, leaving Edith standing alone in her wedding dress with nowhere to hide and no way to escape the humiliation. That scene is one of the most uncomfortable moments in Downton Abbey history. And the reason it hit so hard is because of how quietly Edith fell apart. She did not scream. She did not make a scene. She just stood there, absorbing it, the way she had always absorbed every painful thing that came her way. And then she went home and carried on. Because that was what women like Edith did in that world. They carried on. But the pain did not stop there, not even close, because next came Michael Gregson, the man who would become the great love of Edith's earlier life and also the source of her deepest wound. Michael was smart, kind, and completely devoted to Edith in a way that felt real and genuine. He saw her talent and encouraged her to write. He gave her a role at his magazine and treated her like someone whose mind and voice actually mattered. For the first time, Edith felt truly seen by someone. The problem was that Michael was already married to a woman who was mentally unwell and confined to an institution. Divorce was not something the law made easy in that era, and so Michael and Edith existed in this painful in-between space, loving each other without being able to fully be together in the way they both wanted. And then Michael went to Germany to try and sort out his legal situation, and he simply never came back. He disappeared for months. Nobody knew what had happened to him, and Edith was left waiting, not even able to grieve properly because there was no confirmed ending, just silence and uncertainty and a quiet dread that grew heavier with every passing week. When the truth finally emerged, it was devastating. Michael had been killed during a period of violent political unrest in Germany. He was gone, and Edith, who could not even publicly mourn him the way a wife would mourn a husband, had to process that loss largely alone, away from the full comfort and support that a more accepted relationship would have brought her. And if that were not enough, Edith was also carrying another secret. She was pregnant with Michael's child. In the world of Downton Abbey, an unmarried woman having a child outside of marriage was not simply a personal matter. It was a social disaster. It would have affected not just Edith, but her entire family, their reputation, their standing, and so Edith made an almost unbearably hard decision. She gave her daughter Marigold away to a farming family to be raised, quietly, away from the eyes of the world. But she could not stay away. She visited, she watched, she loved this child from a distance, carrying the truth inside her like a stone she could never put down. Eventually Marigold came to live at Downton, introduced under a carefully constructed story, and Edith got to be near her daughter. But the weight of the secret, the fear of it being discovered, the constant management of a lie told out of necessity, that never fully went away. This is who Edith was when Bertie Pelham came into her life, a woman who had been left at the altar, a woman who had lost the man she loved to violence and circumstance, a woman raising her child in secret, a woman who had every reason to shut herself off from love entirely and almost no reason left to believe it would ever work out for her. There is a certain kind of person who walks into a room and does not demand anything from it. They do not need everyone to turn and look. They do not arrive with noise or performance or a carefully constructed version of themselves designed to impress. They simply walk in, genuine and unhurried. And somehow that quiet confidence ends up being the most attractive thing in the room. That was Bertie Pelham, and in a show full of complicated men who brought complicated problems into Edith's life, Bertie was something she had never quite encountered before. He was straightforward, he was kind, and he meant every single word he said. When Bertie first appeared in Downton Abbey, he did not arrive with dramatic fanfare. He was not introduced as some grand romantic prospect with a mysterious past or a hidden agenda. He came in almost quietly, a decent man from a good family, polite and pleasant and easy to be around. And at first glance, that might have seemed almost too simple for a show like Downton, where everything and everyone tended to carry layers of complication underneath the surface. But that simplicity was exactly the point. Because Edith had spent years surrounded by complications, what she needed, even if she did not yet know how to ask for it, was someone uncomplicated. What made Bertie genuinely different from the men who had come before him was not his title or his house or high position in society, though all of those things were certainly present. What made him different was the way he paid attention. He listened when Edith spoke. He did not talk over her or redirect the conversation back to himself. He did not treat her opinions as charming little thoughts that a woman was allowed to have before the real conversation resumed. He actually engaged with what she said, responded to it, built on it. And for Edith, who had spent most of her life being the sister whose words floated off into the air unacknowledged, that kind of attention was almost disorienting. It took her a moment to trust it because she was simply not used to it. He also found her impressive, and he was not shy about saying so. Edith ran a magazine. She had built something real in a world that did not easily hand opportunities to women, and she had done it through genuine effort and intelligence. Bertie looked at that and saw exactly what it was. He did not see it as an unusual hobby or a charming little project that kept her busy. He saw it as evidence of a capable, driven woman who had carved out a space for herself in an industry dominated by men. And he respected that deeply. That respect was not performed. It was not a tactic. It came through in the way he spoke to her, the way he asked questions about her work with real curiosity, the way he never once made her feel like she needed to downplay what she had accomplished in order to make him comfortable. And then there was the way he looked at her, not the way men had looked at Mary, with that mixture of desire and challenge and competition that always seemed to run underneath the surface of her romantic encounters. Bertie looked at Edith with something warmer and steadier than that. There was admiration in it, certainly, but there was also something that felt almost like relief, as though he had been looking for exactly this person and had not quite expected to find her here, in this house, at this point in his life. It was the look of someone who was not playing a game. Of course, it was not immediately smooth between them. Nothing in Edith's life had ever been immediately smooth, and this was no exception. There were moments of uncertainty, moments where Edith pulled back because the fear of being hurt again was louder than the hope of things going right. She had built a kind of internal armor over the years, not a cold armor, not the sharp defensive kind that Mary sometimes wore, but a quieter one, a careful, watchful distance that she kept between herself and anything that felt too good to be true. Bertie had to earn his way through that distance, and what was remarkable was that he did it without pushing. He did not try to force the walls down. He simply stayed, consistent, patient, genuinely present, and slowly, without any grand moment of decision, Edith began to let him in. There was also the matter of who Bertie was in the world beyond Downton. He came from a respectable family, but he was not extravagantly wealthy in the way some of the show's characters were. He was not arriving to sweep Edith off her feet with a castle and a fortune. What he had was something quieter, but arguably more valuable in the context of everything she had experienced. He had integrity. He had a stable, honest character that did not shift depending on the situation or the audience. He was the same person in private that he was in public. And in a world where so much of social life was about performance and presentation, that consistency was something close to revolutionary. It is also worth noting what Bertie represented for Edith in terms of her place within her own family. So much of Edith's pain over the years had been tied to feeling lesser, feeling like the one who did not quite measure up, the one whose romantic life was a series of disasters, while her sisters found their paths. Mary had Matthew, then Mary had others, Sybil had Tom, and Edith had a string of heartbreaks and a secret she carried alone. Bertie, in a quiet but significant way, changed the balance. He was not a consolation prize. He was not someone Edith had settled for because better options had not worked out. He was a genuinely good man who had chosen her, specifically and deliberately, out of all the people he could have chosen, and that mattered more than any title or estate ever could have. By the time Bertie and Edith were spending real time together, something had shifted between them that the audience could feel even before either character fully acknowledged it. There was a warmth in their scenes together that felt different from the tension and uncertainty that had characterized Edith's previous relationships. It felt lighter, easier, like to people who actually enjoyed being in each other's company, rather than to people performing the idea of romance for an audience of family members and society expectations. And that ease, that genuine enjoyment of each other, was the foundation on which everything that came next was built. Because before a kiss can mean anything, there has to be something real underneath it. There has to be a connection that has been built slowly and honestly, brick by brick, through real conversations and real moments and real choices to keep showing up. Bertie and Edith had that. They had built it carefully, almost without realizing they were building it, and by the time they were standing close enough for everything to change, the foundation was already solid enough to hold the weight of what was coming. There are moments in life that do not announce themselves. They do not come with a warning or a countdown or a dramatic shift in the weather. They simply arrive, quietly and without permission. And before you even fully understand what is happening, everything has already changed. The kiss between Edith and Bertie was exactly that kind of moment. It did not feel staged. It did not feel like a scene written to satisfy an audience that had been waiting too long. It felt like something that had been growing in the space between two people for a long time and had finally, gently found its way to the surface. The setting itself said everything without saying a word. Downton Abbey had a way of using its spaces to reflect the emotional weight of what was happening inside its characters, and this moment was no different. The house stood around them the way it always did, grand and permanent and full of history. But in that particular moment, it felt less like a monument to tradition and more like a witness, like the wolves themselves had been holding their breath alongside Edith for years, waiting for this exact moment to finally arrive. When Bertie moved closer to Edith, there was nothing rushed about it. That was one of the things that made the moment so quietly powerful. In a lesser story, the kiss might have been played for maximum drama, all urgency and sudden heat, and the kind of passion that makes noise. But this was not that kind of story, and Edith was not that kind of woman, and Bertie was not that kind of man. What happened between them was tender. It was careful. It was two people who understood the weight of what they were stepping into and chose to step into it anyway, eyes open, fully present, without any pretense or performance layered on top of it. Edith did not pull away, and that, more than anything else, told you exactly where she was, because the old Edith, the Edith from the earlier seasons, who had been burned so many times, the hope itself had started to feel dangerous. That Edith would have found a reason to pull away. She would have heard some quiet internal alarm and retreated back behind her careful distance, telling herself she was being sensible, telling herself she was protecting something. But she did not retreat. She stayed. She let it happen. She let herself be kissed by a man who meant it, and she kissed him back. And in doing so, she made a choice that was braver than almost anything else she had done in the entire run of the show, because choosing to love again after everything she had survived was not a small thing. It was enormous. It required her to silence every voice inside her that had ever told her she was not worth staying for, not worth choosing, not worth the effort of a love that was simple and good and real. It required her to look at Bertie, this man who had shown up consistently and honestly and without a gender, and decide that she believed him, that she believed in what was growing between them, that she was willing to risk being wrong one more time because the possibility of being right was worth more than the safety of staying closed off. The audience felt all of that in the kiss, not because it was long or dramatic or accompanied by a sweeping musical moment that told you exactly how to feel, but because of everything that had come before it. Years of watching Edith absorb disappointment and keep going. Years of watching her love people who could not fully love her back. Years of watching her sit at tables where she was overlooked and smile through pain she never fully let anyone see. All of that history lived inside that single moment. And it gave the kiss a weight that no amount of dramatic staging could have manufactured. And Bertie, standing there with her, was not simply a man kissing a woman he found attractive. He was someone making a statement without words. He had heard the whispers about Edith. He knew the family had a complicated view of her. He had navigated the social landscape of that world long enough to understand that aligning yourself with the overlooked sister was not necessarily the obvious choice. And he did it anyway. He chose her anyway, not reluctantly, not with conditions, not with a quiet asterisk attached. He chose her completely, and the kiss was the moment that made that choice visible. What followed in the immediate aftermath was just as telling as the moment itself. There was no grand speech. There was no sudden declaration that rearranged everything dramatically. There was just two people standing in the warm, quiet aftermath of something real, looking at each other with the kind of steadiness that does not need to fill silence with words. Edith's expression in that moment carried something that had been largely absent from her face throughout the series. It was not just happiness, though happiness was certainly there. It was something closer to relief, the deep, settling kind of relief that comes not from a problem being solved, but from a fear being proven wrong, the fear that she was not lovable, the fear that good things were simply not meant for her, the fear that she would always be the one left standing alone while the world moved forward around her. Bertie proved that fear wrong, not with grand gestures or poetic declarations, but with something far more powerful, with consistency, with patience, with a kiss that was not the beginning of a story, but rather the arrival of one that had been quietly building for longer than either of them had perhaps realized. And for the viewers who had followed Edith from the very beginning, who had winced through her humiliations and grieved her losses and quietly rooted for her even when the show itself sometimes seemed to forget she deserved a happy ending. This moment was a gift. It was the show finally saying, clearly and without ambiguity, that the middle sister mattered, that her story was worth telling, that the woman who had always been looked past was deserving of being looked at, fully and lovingly, by someone who would never look away. That is what a kiss can carry when it is earned, not just the feeling of two people drawn together in a moment, but the entire history of everything it took to get there. Every heartbreak that came before every morning. Edith got up and kept going when staying down would have been so much easier. Every small, quiet act of courage that nobody noticed or celebrated, but that built her, slowly, into someone capable of standing in that room and letting love find her without running from it. Edith Crawley spent most of her life being the woman that love forgot, and then Bertie Pelham walked in, paid her attention, stayed patient, and reminded her, and everyone watching, that the best love stories are not always the loudest ones. Sometimes they belong to the quiet ones, the ones who waited the longest, the ones who deserved it the most. And sometimes they arrive in the form of a single and hurried, deeply meant kiss that changes everything without making a sound.